Welcome to Clean Breakthrough, brought to you by Greenville Transitions. We got a topic today. We always talk a little bit before the podcast and kind of what we're going to talk about. And we realized a little bit into it that we should just go ahead and start recording. But we were talking about relapse. I know we talked last week about kind of longer term, bigger picture relapse, and we talked about the three I's and the things that kind of signify long-term recovery or maybe crossing over that threshold. But this time we were talking about more like in the moment relapse, kind of the finite nature of it, or maybe not so finite is what we're going to talk about. So Cole, you want to start us off with maybe what you were just talking about?
Sure, Lucas. Thanks for the intro, brother. That's good. That's a nice job. So we were kind of processing, just obviously in this work with working with people on long-term sobriety, relapse is part of it, or recurrence, as some people call it. It's part of it. And what's always interesting is the processing after the fact. And thankfully, we all have gotten opportunity to do that with people. And I say thankful because you don't always get an opportunity to do that. But the process, like what happened when they had a return to use. And it's very interesting when you talk about, the kind of like immediate relapse versus the more acute issue versus the more chronic issues that may be happening when a relapse occurs. And so we were just kind of pulling that apart and, discussing the story that we usually hear. And we usually hear very like acute, sudden, my addiction basically just jumped on me and just absolutely assaulted me, took advantage of me. And before I knew it, I was, smoking crack behind an alley or something like that. Right. And so like kind of pulling that apart is a really interesting part of our jobs. And you were saying you have a theory that you have not been able to really like prove, but you have a theory, and I have some thoughts on that too. Do you want to go with your theory, Lucas, that you were discussing before we started recording?
Sure thing. That's funny because I think last week when we were talking about that, I was also like, I have a theory about this.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of theories apparently. I've just noticed a trend that and in like my personal life, knowing people in recovery, and then also at GT sober living, even with our IOP, that there is a trend of when people relapse, when it's talked about, especially in the short term, like right after they get caught or they decided they didn't want to do it anymore and come back to sobriety, that it's almost always explained as that it was like this very short-term thing. Everything was great and wonderful. My recovery was so awesome. And then all of a sudden I was at a gas station and somebody just came up to me out of nowhere and said, hey, do you want some drugs? Or I was at the grocery store and I just ended up in the beer aisle, and before I knew it, I was buying beer. And I can kind of believe that in like the shorter term, if you're maybe only sober for like 2 weeks, 4 weeks, you hear a lot of stories like that of like, before I knew it, I was just drinking, but there is a little bit of there's still some of that where it's like, well, it's like, well, you were in a bar. Like, why did you go to a bar? And they're like, and then before I know it, I'm drinking in the bar. And it's like, well, why were you in a bar to begin with if you're only like 2 or 4 weeks sober? And they're like, oh, well, there was music there. And it's like, well, did you have a plan, or did you talk to your schmonzer before? Like, did you do anything kind of prep wise? And they're like, no, I just figured I'd be all good. And so it's like, well, that was maybe not the best idea, obviously, like, and it's funny that there's something about going to a bar, and maybe because bars can have like music and comedy shows and things like that, but I always want to compare it to like going to the dope house and being like, I just went there to hang out. They were playing cards or they were playing spades, and I just figured I'd go for the spades and not the heroin this time. Where it's like, that makes it sound as absurd as it is, but for some reason with bar and alcohol, there's like a little more of like a cultural thing that like, no, you just went there for the burger. So anyways, I guess the theory is just that I find that almost without fail, people act like they were assaulted by drugs and alcohol. Somebody pushed it all over them and they just couldn't help but do it. And I do have some confirmation from some guys that we've worked with that have come back to us that could be honest about it, that were like, no, I was like thinking about it for weeks leading up to it and planning and plotting. And that story about a guy who came up to me at the gas station, that wasn't true. That never happened. It was a guy at my work, and I was talking to him about it for weeks before I finally texted him and said, hey, can I get some? So that's normally what it turns out to be, especially when someone's 6 months, 9 months, a year sober. I find that it's not just this immediate overwhelming thing.
I could give you a little more confirmation there.
Come on.
But I had an incident probably 10 months in, 11 months into my recovery journey, where like life happened, and life always happens. Life is always going to happen. The good, the bad, the ugly. But it was like, started dating a girl when people told me not to date, until I was at least a year in recovery, but I did it a little bit before a year, thought I was ready. And then, we were going through a breakup, and I had this moment of like this urge to use, and I called my schmonzer, and in this case, he was like, hey, just don't move. I'm going to come pick you up. We're going to ride around, talk for a little bit. And if you still want to drink or use by the time we're done talking, I will drop you off at the liquor store. Like if you're that dead set on it. And he came and picked me up, and we had a good talk. But here's the thing is that I had it planned out way before, weeks in advance, of like, eventually something bad is going to happen, and I could use it as my excuse. Like if I'm not completely bought into recovery, honestly, it's probably months of planning of like, hey, if I'm not completely bought in, if there's still this little percentage of me that still wants to go use, I just need to wait for the bad thing to happen. And then that's my out. Like that's what I can tell my mom and my friends and everyone. Like, well, I know I was doing really good, but then this bad thing happened. And then this urge just like jumped on my back of I've got to go use right now. Or I just showed up in the liquor store. I don't even know how I got there. But it was this like, it was in the back of my mind. Like it wasn't this all of a sudden thought.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I had the same thing in my personal story. And that's where I always want to beware, is that I'm not just projecting my personal story onto other people. But it's hard when like you normally compare like my alcoholic recovery experience with almost any other addict alcoholic, and like they overlap almost entirely and like eclipse each other. There's like always this very sliver of like, well, you did this and I did that, and you're white and I'm black, and whatever the thing may be. But it's like normally really small differences in a lot of our behavior, and especially our thoughts. I feel like that's why I feel like that's how people buy into recovery, because I come into a shmay room and people start talking and I'm just like, dude, they have all these thoughts too. Or when you even start like talking as adults and you're like, dude, when I was a kid I used to do this thing, and like you think it's so unique to you, and like no one's ever thought that or done that before, and like all your friends are like, yeah, me too. I feel like there's just this realization of like, oh, I'm not as unique and in like a damaged way or in like a special way either. Yeah, but yeah, I looked at I bought a bottle of, I was going to AA, shmay, and I was on Suboxone, and I was abusing my Suboxone nearly the entire time. Not really getting like super high from it because I was still taking it like weekly, so I had a tolerance. But abusing it for sure. And I was maybe 9 months in. I had like completed the steps. I had a schmonzer. I was like kind of doing the deal, as people would say. And I remember I bought a bottle of regular Listerine, and I stared at it every morning and every night in my bedroom. I had a little sink in my bedroom where I brushed my teeth, and would think about drinking it every morning and every night for probably months before I was finally going to do it. And I looked at it and I was like, all right, it's time, dude. Screw it. Nobody will know. Like tonight, I'm going to take 2 big gulps of this stuff, and instead of spitting that out, I'm going to swallow it and get a feeling. And and then the thought came over me that I was like, I don't drink Listerine. I'm not even really like, alcohol isn't my main thing. I'm a heroin addict. I'm going to go do heroin. So I went and did heroin instead. but it's like you could see this build up to it. And I probably did tell people in my life, like, oh, everything was going so well. And then it was just out of nowhere. I feel like where that came from for me was like it was a deflection of accountability and responsibility in that decision. And that people would give me less grief about it if I said that it was just this short-term overwhelming thing rather than something that I like planned and plotted out and I refused to talk to anyone about and I didn't tell on myself and I didn't ask for help and I didn't go to a meeting and I didn't talk to my sponsor and I didn't write anything down. You know, I just said, I'm just going to keep this to myself and keep plotting and planning, which is like the reservations, like you said, David, of, okay, if something bad enough happens that I feel like I can justify using or drinking over, I'm going to put that in my back pocket and save for that time. And then I feel like it's the O.J. Simpson book, which I thought was, I didn't do it, but here's how I would have done it. But it's actually called If I Did It, Confessions of the Killer.
Wait, he really wrote that book?
Yeah. I think while in
prison,
I thought maybe in prison the second time when he got arrested for like stealing stuff or something.
he came in and like with a gun and was like taking a bunch of this memorabilia or something back or
That
something
he
like
had
that.
sold to someone else.
Yes.
But yeah, I kind of felt like it's like that kind of planning of like, I'm not going to do it, but if I was, here's the liquor store I would go to. Here's the time of day I would go. Here's the excuse I'm going to use. Here's how I'll make people feel bad for giving me crap about it. Here's the heroin dealer I'm going to call. If he doesn't answer, I'll call this guy. If he doesn't answer, I'll go down this street at this time of day and hopefully I'll see someone. Like, so plotted out for just like, oh, and then it just hit me and I just went and did it out of nowhere. You know, there's always this dialogue running in the back.
Yeah. I was always I always had an emergency exit planned. It was even based on like when I went from treatment to sober living. The reason I picked the sober living that I did is I knew I had contacts in that area. So I went to Asheville, North Carolina. I'm from South Georgia, but I knew that I had friends that used in Asheville. So there was my emergency exit. It was like, if I go to this sober living and it's just not for me, I know who to call and I know how to get drugs.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with the theory of yours, Lucas. And for a few reasons, just because like from talking to people and like processing it, you can definitely see the signs. But another one that's pretty clear is, you know, if we've had like a relapse, you know, sometimes we'll say, you know, man, like somebody relapse, and there will be a guess on like who that person was. And more often than not, the guess is accurate. So if this was just truly like, you know, the drug and alcohol, like boogeyman jumping out of the bushes on your back and just like assaulting you out of nowhere, you wouldn't be very accurate with that guess, right? Could hit anybody at any time. But usually like the therapists or the coaches, the people who have been around that person, like they see it coming from a long ways away. And I think it's because there is this more like this chronic nature of like slipping away and setting it up, and you can hear it when somebody's talking to you. I think the other reality is it's had like a twofold benefit for why this story, this narrative that it just like came upon me. It serves like two functions, I think. One is it absolves like responsibility of like bigger change. You know, like there's some really like serious, deeper stuff that I have to work on and like be very consistent with. If it just came upon me all of a sudden, we don't even really know why. It's just a mystery, right? It's cunning, baffling, and like it's just we don't even know. Then it absolves like for future responsibility, right? For like making bigger changes. But I can also say on the normie side, like the family, the supporter, the friend side, it's an easier story to believe if you're not an alcoholic or an addict. Because it's so confusing if you haven't like taken the time to connect the alcoholic addict mind to the way your normal mind works. I remember us having conversations and we had a guy who told a story basically like that. Like I was at a gas station and somebody just came up to me and like offered me drugs. And I remember being more receptive to that story as somebody who's not an alcoholic or addict. And you're like, that ain't true. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe it could have been true, because to think about the other option is like, you know, he intentionally, some part of his brain intentionally set him up and he wanted to go do this and he took steps for that, was a much harder truth for me to digest. And so I think a lot of families in particular can really fall for that story, because they don't really understand it from like a personal level,
I don't think that it's about being alcoholic or non-alcoholic. I think it's just about being close to that person and caring about them and just believing in their recovery and wanting, like that's the codependent story that I want to be true. Is
Okay.
the guy that I've been working with, because I know the guy you're talking about with the gas station, and like there's a part of me that wanted that to be true because I wanted to believe that this guy wouldn't plan this out. Man, he's been doing well and he's been working on his stuff and he's been sober for X amount of months, and like this just can't be this guy. Like I want to believe that he was just assaulted by drugs and alcohol at a gas station and some guy pressured it on him and he tried to say no 5 times, and then he finally just, when the guy said he just give him the drugs for free, he just said, okay, I'll just do them. And then he still went home and he looked at him for 3 hours and thought about doing it and thought about calling and went back and felt like I like that story. I want that story to be true. That story is just rarely, if ever, true. And the other story hurts more for me because I'm like, if I've been working with this guy and I've been talking with him and I thought he was doing well, what does it say about me that I missed this, that I was wrong, that I didn't see it coming? Like, I think it becomes then kind of an ego thing that like it deflects my ego to believe that and think that like, no, I did really good work and he was just assaulted by something or whatever.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. I do think it's like that codependency, just wanting to believe and hoping somebody will be okay, And
I know game. I know game.
Yeah.
I know. I know those stories. I've told those stories. So like, if I believe that, your mom, what hope does she have?
Right.
I'm not your mom. I didn't birth you. I didn't raise you. I'm just a guy who's been working with you for the past year and really wants to believe in your recovery. But I've told all these kind of stories myself. If there's a part of me that believes it, what defense does a, mom or a dad or a brother or sister or someone who kind of struggles with codependency, what chance do they stand?
Well, I think the chance lies in their own work. I think you have to do a lot of work of like connecting the mechanics, the psychological mechanics that are going on in addiction and connecting it to your own life. It may not be substance related for you, but it could be related to a lot of other things. It could be related to like work. It could be related to how you like show up around the home. I know for me personally, like if my wife brings up any one thing I did that she perceives as wrong, I can justify the heck out of it. I can say I was doing it with this intentionality or this is the reason I did it. And it's only when she either explains it or I can get it through my thick skull, the bigger pattern, right? Like the bigger like personality pattern that I have that leads to me doing A, B, or C. And on a personal level, for me, it's usually like avoidance, right? Like I'm avoiding. And so then I maybe like not communicating about this thing, or I'm pushing this decision off, or something get brought up and I just don't bring it up again. When that whole pattern of avoidance is spelled out and I can see that playing out over the course of my life, that hits really hard, but it's also where real change comes from, right? That's where real change comes from. But if she's just like, hey, you haven't brought up, the fact that we need to like set up a chore chart for the kids. I've been very busy. Do you know what I do at work every day? And this is what's been going on. And the pollen, have you seen it? It's crazy. And by the way, like, what are we going to cook for dinner? Like, you can come up with all kind of crazy reasons to justify yourself in that moment, right?
We're at ran. You need to wash the dishes.
Yeah. So it's just like you can make up all that stuff. And that's what's happening in that moment. Like the drugs and alcohol just jumped on me. Like, I don't need to take ownership that like, okay, I have not talked to my sponsor, or I have not like reached out to somebody else, or have I truly been trying to help my like fellow man, or have I just been making it all about me? Like some of the deeper themes or patterns that are in one's life. Am I really addressing that? So it's super important, but I think it's like a family member, a loved one, a supporter or whatever. I think you have to do your own work on that, and start to realize like those more like deeper patterns that you have, because we all have them. We have hubris, we have pride, we have avoidance, we have those things, and it shows up in our life in certain ways. And we have to like do the work to realize like how that's showing up. And then we can like empathize with our loved one who has an addiction. We can empathize. It's going to be different, but we can empathize and get it a little bit better, I think.
I agree. I think that's so true. And I think I don't ever want this to sound like we're just beating up on people who relapse. Like that's never my intention or to make fun of it or anything like that. But it's just that like the best thing that you can learn from a relapse is what to do different the next time. And if there's nothing to do different because you were doing everything perfect and drugs just assaulted you wherever you were, then it's a very hopeless thing. Versus like, hey man, I had this card in my pocket that I didn't want to show. And I had reservations about this thing that if this happened, I would definitely do it. And it's like the relapse can be the thing that facilitates all those coming out on the table. There's like there can be this big vulnerable moment where you're like, dude, I planned this thing for a month. That's a lie that I just thought about it today. I've been planning it. It's no surprise why I relapse. And this time getting sober, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to change that. And I'm telling you this person in my life so that you can hold me accountable, because now you know what the card looks like. So when I play it, you know that, and you can say like, dude, this is what you did last time. Come on, let's not do this. Like, let's work on our stuff and get sober. So I think it's all for like a bigger positive thing, but then it's got to be the real vulnerable, honest, humble truth of what actually happened if you're going to learn from it. And that's the frustrating part, because I feel like that's where you come at odds, where it's like us on the side of trying to help someone get sober and someone who's like kind of resisting it a little bit, that, then they're like, oh, you don't care and you're just trying to beat me up, or you just keep wanting to talk about the relapse. I'm trying to move forward. I'm trying to be in the present. Isn't that what we do in recovery? Like we've heard all these kind of lines and stuff, but it is for a good reason that you dive into it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I think we all have like a lot of empathy for people who experience a relapse. I mean, you guys have done it personally, and there's a lot of people I've worked with over the years that I love who have experienced relapses.
Whoa.
You never
I didn't
relapsed?
relapse. I mean, well, I guess I did before I went to treatment. If yeah, I guess.
Well, okay. How about this? You went to treatment and then you got on your journey, but before that, like,
yes,
that's actually a whole nother conversation that jogged my brain. Did you ever like say, I'm going to quit this and then went back to it? Okay. So that's an important thing, because sometimes you'll hear that from people of like, well, when are they just going to get it? When are they just going to it's going to get it? I went to a meeting and I heard this guy say, it just clicked and he just put it down, and it's kind of like said from this, like very much like back in my day, listen, I was really like, it was uphill to school, both ways, and in the snow, barefoot. But the reality is, it's like, I know that guy just getting it in a meeting one day and having that like spiritual awakening, there were probably like, I don't know, 1,700 conversations and concerns around him for years before, people saying, hey, you have a problem, or I don't know if I want to hang out with you anymore, or you get really wild when we go to the bar, or, maybe you can't be on this team anymore. Maybe you can't be in this club anymore. There are like so many moments where this is a problem, and it can just be justified away if you look at the micro example. Well, that coach was a jerk. These people are snobby. That job wasn't good for me. But then when you look at the bigger picture thematically, which connects to what we're talking about, you get a bigger picture and the themes, you're like, dang, like I am like a common denominator here. And this is like something in me that I got to work on,
Yeah.
But to David's point, when every day is a relapse, it's not a relapse.
That's fair.
Because that's how a lot of my addiction was like every day, but I even feel like I never wanted to stop. I just maybe tell some people I wanted to stop so they'd get off my case, but I didn't really want to stop. So that makes it tougher.
Yeah, I definitely went through phases, but it was always like trading out one mood mind altering substance for another. But I would like hit a point where it's like, okay, yeah, Oxycontin is destroying my life or my relationships, and I need to stop that. So I'm going to put that down, and then I'm just going to do methadone, and then I'm just going to drink while I'm doing methadone. And like I would always justify like picking up the next thing, or I'm not going to smoke weed anymore. I'm just going to drink. But then I would drink to excess and till I'm blackout and wetting my bed.
Yeah. Which, if you know David McNeese, wetting his bed is not in your like values whatsoever.
Oh, that is anti-David behavior.
Definitely.
That is addict David behavior. You ever hear David come on this podcast and say, "Guys, I wet the bed last night"? Just know
That's,
that
that's a
something's not
warning
right.
sign. Yeah. But I even like, it's interesting even breaking down by substances, like, well, I haven't done oxy in so long, like that was the real problem. That's another one of those things, like you can justify oxy with the problem, but this is why alcohol and weed are not, and it's just kind of like that same type of bargaining that we're talking about. Like the drugs and alcohol just jumped on me. It's the same thing. Instead of looking at the bigger picture of like, I do not want to live life sober. I do not want to be on this earth existing as I feel, as I think, as I feel in my body. I do not want to do that. I need something to change that for me, So
Yeah. No, I agree. It's interesting when it comes down to that stuff of like, when do you really want it and really try at it and then relapse and fail versus just maybe telling some people or being forced into a sober living or treatment or whatever. And then you go back to use and everyone's like, "Oh, you relapsed." And it's like, I never wanted to be sober. I was planning the first time I could get high or drunk from the day that you forced me to go to treatment, or I had such shitty options that treatment sounded like the best one, where at least I wasn't like homeless or something, but I was never intending to be sober. And that's more what my like 10 years of addiction looked like, was just every time I was kind of forced into something, but never wanted it for myself. So kind of hard to call it a relapse.
I wonder if there was like ever a moment in which you thought like, man, maybe I do want to do this, but if I fail, I need to hedge my bets and I'll just tell everybody I didn't really want it. I can't deal with like the disappointment if I just like crashed out of this IOP, or, my mom's crying again, or whatever discomfort is coming up because I've used again. I'll just, the way I like hedge that emotional burden or price of that, is to say, I never wanted that in the first place. I never wanted that. It's just it's a constant avoidance of discomfort.
Yeah, I think that I never wanted it, but I think that if I did want it, I would have said that. Like I would have been that, what you just explained. Where it's like, and I think that's kind of why some part of me didn't want it. Because I was like, if I fail, that like it almost protected me from failing. But I do think even above that was just like, I don't want to stop this. I really don't. I just want people to stop giving me consequences. I want life to line up where I can do it as much as I want every day, no problems. And like that is what I was seeking above all the time.
Yeah, my daughter does this when we play like board games and stuff. And the moment she's like starting to lose or does lose, she just is like, I didn't care. I didn't want to play that anyway. You know what I mean? Like that's the way she just gets control back. It doesn't have to deal with the fact that she's also pretty competitive and doesn't like losing. So she's like, this game is dumb anyways. I don't even want to play. It's like, okay, Campbell. All right.
Yeah. I definitely have seen and heard that some of like in the rooms and stuff, people saying that they didn't want to want it so that they could not fail at it.
Yes.
Or just saying that they never wanted it so they didn't technically fail at it.
Don't you think there's a little bit of that in all of us? That was true for me. I mean, I think there's a little bit of that. I can remember that in sports growing up. It's like I would want to, if I could tell I wasn't the best at a sport, I wanted to get out of it because I didn't want to lose or I didn't want to embarrass myself.
I definitely think there's a bit of that in all of us. That's where it's like empathy comes from that I was talking about earlier, for like people to do their own work to explore. Like we do not like being uncomfortable. We do not like feeling inferior or like we're out of control. And so, yeah, we'll do it. It takes a lot to withstand that, to continue to do the sport when you suck at it, to stay in the college degree, even when it's like maybe not natural, and like learning to discern when it's just like life, higher power, the world saying this is not the route for me. It's creating too much like pain and suffering versus like discomfort. And like when do you bail on something? And that's something that I think we all are like constantly trying to figure out.
Well, that's my favorite. One of my favorite. Hard to put a favorite on it, but one of my favorite quotes from The Wire is a character named Daniels, and he said he's like complaining, talking about that the game is rigged, and then his wife Marla says, "You can't lose if you don't play." And I feel like that was two voices in my head of like somebody saying, you need to get recovery and figure this out. And I'm like, that's a rigged game, because like it's just so BS that like I have to like live life, be responsible, be an adult, do all this stuff, figure out my aim, my mission, my purpose, whatever, and I can't use drugs and alcohol at all. That feels like a rigged game. And then the second voice being like, hey, you can't lose if you don't play. So like just don't play that game and keep playing the game that you want to play, which is do drugs whenever you want, drink, obfuscate, hide, manipulate, steal, lie, do whatever you need to do to just not have to play that game. Love that show.
Great show. Might be time to dive back into that one again.
Not for me.
No.
It's too fresh.
Too fresh.
I watch it once every like maybe 5 years. Same with Sopranos.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really good though. So yeah, I think like, I mean, I would just encourage like the people who are listening who maybe don't struggle with substances to like really start to investigate what are the things you do in your life to avoid discomfort. And you may say things like, well, of course I have to go to work, or yeah, we have to eat like a lot of fruits and vegetables with our meals, and yeah, we have to do whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. What are the things that you do to like escape on some level, and shut off like the anxiety, to control the anxieties, like, and think about that and like the bigger patterns in your life as you've been doing that like over the years, over the decades. But yeah, that takes a lot of like work figuring that out, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's easier to pinpoint it if you look at it, like target it towards friction that you're having with someone in your life or a partner. I mean, that's where mine is today, is like when we go to therapy sessions, I'm in couples therapy or marital therapy with my wife. And it's like, Dave, the therapist saying, David, like are you sure you should have reacted that way? Was that the right reaction? And I'm like, shit. I got to change something else about myself. I'm already gotten sober. Haven't I done enough?
David and I both be losing couple therapy all the time, dude.
Yeah,
we are
Lucas
not.
wins it.
Lucas allegedly wins it, dude. But what comes around goes around. So be careful. Enjoy it while you got it, Lucas.
Like 100 for 100, dude.
I think you're exactly right. Like the friction.
Yeah, just look for friction in your life, and then there's something there where you're like grappling for control.
Always. And that, like you said, Cole, I mean, that's not a addict alcoholic thing, in my opinion. I think that's just a very human thing, that we just don't like discomfort and we avoid it every place that we can, unless we like severely buy in or significantly buy into the idea that like discomfort is good for me in some ways. And even that, I find that I'm like up and down with, you know, when that comes to like exercise, of like, okay, this discomfort is good. I have still not found the day where I'm like about to go to the gym and I'm like, yes, I get to go to the gym and be uncomfortable. And then I'm there struggling and I'm on the last rep and I want to just give up. And I'm just like, yes, I get to do this last rep or this last 5 minutes running or whatever. Like I still hate it every time. So like, that's where it comes down to for me. And that kind of ties in with something David said, that like my expectation versus the reality, and my expectation can be, I've already done enough. How much more do I need to give up? A little comfort's a good thing, versus the reality being like, dude, there's always going to be the next thing that I got to work on. There's always going to be the next thing. There's not going to be a therapy session, a day in life, a week in life, a month, a year in life that I run into where I'm like, dude, I nailed it, knocked it out of the park. No more issues to look at. I've officially completed the game. And then the idea is like, what a good thing, which ties back to that Jimmy Carr quote, where he's talking about like, you know, what are problems? Problems are just things that need your attention, and all we have in life is attention and time. So like, we might as well solve problems while we're here. What a terrible world that has no problems to solve. What the heck do you do then? You know, just sit back and watch TV and do nothing and probably die sooner because you have nothing to like pursue, nothing to go for, nothing to strive for. But that's so backwards in my mind. I want that world, even though that world would be terrible for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so much of it's rooted in insecurity, because like for me, like going to the gym, it is something I look forward to doing and really enjoy it, and we'll go there and find fun and really look forward to it, because I was like, the history with like growing up and being like into sports and everything, there's a very positive correlation to athletics and moving my body and like feeling good, being fun. Now you could switch it around and be like doing paperwork. You know what I mean? Like doing like business stuff, running like spreadsheets or all that kind of stuff. I'm way more avoidant with that. Even though I typically feel really good after doing that and taking the time to be intentional and get that stuff done. I just don't have the same type of like positive reinforcement with it, and also escapism. And so I think that's the thing. It's all different for us, but we all do it. It just shows up differently for us. Because you could also point to people who are like, you know, they love doing the paperwork and stuff. They love doing all that kind of stuff. But then go home and like talk to their like spouse. You know what I mean? They're like, no, like they don't have this like positive reinforcement. They'll do anything to like avoid that, you know? And I think too, like it is like constantly rearing its head. Like that's something like even, you know, my wife and I have been together forever. And like it wasn't until we've been having this like ongoing like riff and struggle. And it wasn't until last week, after like months of talking about it, wasn't until last week I finally like it clicked that she is talking about my own pattern of avoidance that has been showing up, and I can trace back in my life to probably being like 12 or 11. And I'm 40 years old now. And I'm like, oh, dang, that was just another manifestation of this, like this core theme that I struggle with. And then once I realized that, it hit in a completely different way. And it was no longer like defensive and like I can explain and justify stuff. I see now like what you're talking about. It's just showing up in a different way. And so I think, and that's what being a therapist, and that's what being with somebody for a long time. I guess what I'm trying to say is always stay humble and always like keep looking and being receptive to like, there probably are some things you're missing, you know, like you're probably missing some things about yourself, and you need people around you to present friction, or even just to reflect back to you like, hey, what you're doing may not be like in your best interest. It may not be in the best interest for the people around you.
Always. Always. Heater rant, Cole. Heater rant.
Just ranting, man. Just yapping.
It is like that, the acceptance of that expectation, though, or that reality that like I will never like working out the way that I like eating sugar. I will never like budgeting the way that I like playing video games. Like those will just never be on the same level. And I got to accept that and figure out how to still do one more than the other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the hard part. And I will fail, and I will have good periods in my life where I do really well with that. And then I'll have slumps, and that's okay, because that just gives me something new to work towards and something to strive for. And that's a good thing. I need that kind of stuff. But that involves me being imperfect, or else I don't have anything to work on or anything to strive towards.
Yes, sir.
Knowledge
All right.
bombs.
All right, guys, that was the Clean Breakthrough podcast by Greenville Transitions. And we're going to wrap it up there. So
Well done, Lucas.
We'll see you next week.
And then he's gone.
Dude, he does this.
Oh, I think he's meant to hit stop recording again. And because I think we're still recording. Oh, God, he's back. He's back, dude. He's coming back. Here he comes.
God, he just hates it. He said, done with the podcast, done with